Through the jungle, into the forgotten war tonight, we go quiet. Not because there's nothing to say, but because too much was left unsaid. As you close your eyes and let the night wrap itself around you like a cool blanket, we're going to drift backward. Not centuries, not dynasties, but into a war that was both recent and somehow already forgotten. This is not the story of generals in glass cases, not the one with medals on chests and names etched in stone. This is the story of the foot soldier who slept on mud, the mother who carried bullets in her woven basket, the teenage boy who pretended to be brave because he had to be. This is the world of the Filipino guerrilla. World War II, Philippines, 1942 to 1945. A war not just of bombs and bullets, but of silence, of starvation, of betrayal, of moving through shadows with nothing but a bolo, a prayer, and a mosquito net that barely worked. And tonight, you will walk through that world, slowly, carefully, because in the jungle, even sleep is a luxury. Now breathe, let the quiet pull you in, and prepare for the first step of the journey. Wake up, it's not morning, it's survival. You don't wake to an alarm. You don't rise to sunlight streaming through windows or the sound of birds chirping in a garden. Instead, your eyes blink open to the slow murkiness of dawn slipping through thick jungle canopy. The air is heavy with moisture, and it clings to your skin like a second layer. There's no breeze, only the constant hum of insects, and the faint rustling of leaves movements, you can always be sure, are just wind. The ground beneath you is still wet from last night's rainfall. You slept coiled up on a bed of palm fronds, or maybe burlap sacks, if you're lucky, with a folded jacket stuffed with dried grass for a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, and you barely slept. But you're alive, and that counts. You sit up slowly. You don't move quickly anymore. Quickness can mean noise, and noise means death. Your joints ache, but you're used to it now. The cold from the earth seeps up through your bones, and it stays with you longer than it should. Your back cracks as you stretch, but you grit your teeth and keep silent. Around you, the others are beginning to stir. Quiet movements, a whispered cough, a shifting of boots. No one speaks unless they have to. Language, like strength, is rationed out here. You reach for your canteen. It's dented, the paint long scratched away, but it still holds water. It's lukewarm. A bit of rust flakes off the rim. You pretend not to notice. You've drunk worse. The water tastes metallic and slightly sour, but it weights your throat, and that's enough. You remember the stream you fetched it from hid deep past the ridge where the trees grow so close together the light barely gets in. You remember crouching by the banks, scooping it carefully, watching for leeches. You check your belongings. A knife tucked in cloth, a bolo dulled by weeks of use, a small sack containing your share of salt, one cigarette stub you keep more for morale than used, and a half-smoked bundle of dried fish wrapped in banana leaves. There's also a small rosary, carved from bamboo by your cousin before he was taken. You don't pray with it anymore. You just like holding it. A low whistle calls your attention. It's the signal. Food patrol. You stand, stretch your limbs, and sling your gear over your shoulder. It's not a heavy pack. There's nothing left to weigh you down. Just a few essentials, and your will to keep going. You follow the others through the jungle, path barely a trail, really. It's a route you've memorized, stepping around snare traps, ducking under low branches, stepping softly over mud patches that could swallow your foot if you're careless. You and two others head north. You're chosen because you move quietly, and you know the river paths well. The jungle is dense and always shifting. Trees fall, roots break through soil, trails vanish overnight. You watch the trees like they're old friends that could turn on you at any moment. One of the men you're with, an older farmer turned fighter, points out edible plants as you go, a habit he's kept even now, as if naming things could keep you safe. You reach a narrow path that snakes along a ridge. Below is a slow-moving river, brown and thick from last night's rain. The soil here is unstable, and you move carefully, placing each footstep like it matters, because it does. A bad step means a slide down into that water, and maybe worse. It's not just drowning you worry about. The Japanese sometimes lace the water with oil. Sometimes there are crocodiles. Sometimes You just disappear. You cross a rope bridge, or what's left of one. It sways gently, and the rope burns your palm as you hold on. Your balance shifts. You breathe deeply, calming yourself. You think of old bridges from your childhood, sturdy ones, across streams where you once played. This isn't that, but pretending helps. You make it across, so do the others. One pats your back, wordlessly. Midday is nearing, though the light hardly changes, just the heat. It gets heavier, pressing down on your shoulders like a wet blanket. You sweat through your shirt. Your chest feels sticky. Your eyes sting from the salt. Still, you walk. There's no resting in the open. You check your surroundings constantly. Look for unnatural bends in the grass. Listen for the quiet that doesn't sound right. Even the absence of birdsong can be a warning. You stay alert, even when exhausted. You've seen what happens to those who don't. You finally reach the drop site. There's a clearing, more mud than grass, and in the middle, like a gift from the sky, is a tangle of white parachute silk caught in the branches. A crate lies broken open beneath it. You rush forward, heart racing, but caution tempers your pace. Traps have been laid before, but this one looks clean. Inside, there are tins, real food, spam, beans, crackers, sealed in wax paper. There's a roll of bandages too, and a packet of sulfur powder. You want to cheer, but you don't. You can't. Instead, you nod. This is enough to keep 10 men going for 3 days. You pack what you can carry and split the load. The rest, you bury nearby. You'll come back for it. If you live long enough, the walk back is quieter. Not because you're safer, but because the weight of supplies makes you think more about who will get what, about who deserves more, about who's sick and who's not. The choices aren't fair, but they have to be made. You walk slower, knowing that each step is now more valuable than before. You are carrying not just food, but survival itself. Back at camp, the others wait. Eyes light up when they see what you bring. Not s'mores, exactly. Those are rare, but a kind of soft relief settles over the group. The cook takes the cans, the medic takes the band. You sit under your tree again, this time with a small piece of cracker in your mouth. It crumbles like dust, but it's real. It tastes like something that wasn't dug out of the forest, and that makes it special. As night begins to fall, you help reinforce the camp. You gather wood, though most of it is too damp to burn well. You reinforce the trenches dug shallow into the earth. You check traps for intruders, human or otherwise. It's methodical, repetitive. It keeps your hands busy, and busy hands are a comfort. Someone passes by and gives you a second tin of food. A silent thanks for your help on the drop mission. You nod again. No words. You open the tin slowly, carefully. The hiss of air escaping is loud in the silence. Inside, corned beef. You share it with the man sitting next to you. He doesn't say thank you either. He just eats beside you, both of you chewing in rhythm with the crickets. Later, as darkness fully claims the jungle, a low wind picks up. The trees sway gently, leaves rustle, and it sounds almost like ocean waves. You close your eyes and pretend that's where you are, on a beach, not a battlefield. You imagine sand, not mud, a pillow, not a tree root, laughter, not silence, a dream, not this. Sleep doesn't come quickly, but it comes. Not all at once, not deeply, but in slow layers, like fog rolling in. Around you, the others doze in shifts. You keep one hand near your weapon, just in case. You listen to the sounds of breathing, of stillness, of things alive in the dark, and in that lull, just before you drift off, you think one last thought. Today, you survived. Tomorrow, maybe again. Maybe not. But for now, you rest. Night patrols and the weight of darkness. Night patrol begins, not because it's safe, but because it's necessary. After the quiet hours of dusk, the forest doesn't sleep, it only changes form. Sounds sharpen, shadows lengthen. The frogs start their chorus, joined by cicadas, then distant barking from wild dogs. Some of the trees creak like tired bones, and the earth itself seems to breathe. It is in this strange and humming night that you and a few others are sent out again, feet muffled by wet soil, hearts quiet but alert. You carry your rifle, but you cradle it more like a fragile item than a weapon. The barrow is wrapped in cloth to prevent it from reflecting moonlight. Every step is deliberate. No crunching of branches, no snapping of twigs. Your eyes adjust to the low light, but it's never perfect. Sometimes you see movement, a leaf, maybe, or not, and you have to choose whether to stop, whether to signal, or whether to simply press on and pretend you didn't feel your heartbeat jump. Your job tonight is simple. Check the perimeter traps and monitor any signs of movement from the East Trail. The Japanese are known to scout these parts, especially during the new moon. Tonight, the moon is thin, barely more than a sliver in the sky. It gives no help, but that's both a curse and a blessing. You're harder to see, but so are they. Along the trail, you encounter the first trap, a pit covered in palm leaves and loose dirt. It's still intact. The sharpened bamboo stakes inside glisten faintly from moisture. You double-check it, recover it carefully, and mark it with a barely visible knot in a nearby vine. A guerrilla code, something only your group would recognize. You continue forward, always scanning, always listening. The group you're with is quiet. You've patrolled with them before. One of them, a boy no older than 16, walks beside you. He never talks unless asked, but he hums, sometimes just under his breath. Tonight, he's quiet. You wonder what he's thinking. If he's imagining home, if he's thinking about the cousin he lost last month, if he even remembers what it was like before all this. At one point, the trail bends near a ridge. You stop. You hear something. Not animals, not the wind. It's a rustle too distinct. A pause, then a crunch. Everyone drops low. Rifles raise slowly. You wait 10 seconds, 20. The sound fades. Just another patrol. Maybe, dear. No one dares to check. You wait longer than needed, just to be sure. Then, slowly, the group rises and continues. More cautious now. Every noise is a question without an answer. Further along, you find another marker. A scarf tied around a tree trunk. It's one of yours. A signal, a warning left by the previous team. Activity nearby. Be silent. Do not return the same way. You take a moment to breathe that in. Danger is always near, but some nights it's closer than others. Tonight might be one of those nights. You reroute, cutting through thicker jungle brush. The leaves whip against your face. Your clothes soak through. You step into puddles too dark to see. Your boots squelch softly. A leech clings to your sock. You don't bother removing it. There are more waiting anyway. You just keep walking. The jungle is a living thing. It pulls at your arms, clutches your legs, breathes in your face. Eventually, you reach a creek. You follow it upstream. The water flows lazily, but it's cool, and the sound is steady. A constant hush that becomes your new companion. You feel sleepiness creeping into your limbs, not from peace, but from exhaustion. Patrols aren't just physically draining, they wear at your nerves, gnaw at your inner quiet. Every time you blink longer than usual, your body begs for rest, but there is no rest yet. You climb a small slope and come across another marker, this one indicating a safe return path. You follow it. You're nearing camp again, and the tension slowly lessens, though never fully. One man in your group stumbles. His foot caught a root. He doesn't fall, but he curses under his breath. You all stop and wait. The silence returns, stretching again, just in case. Back at camp, the watch rotates. You and your team return just before midnight. Someone hands you a mug of lukewarm coffee. It's burley coffee made from roasted corn and tree bark, but it's hot, and it tastes bitter enough to feel real. You drink slowly, seated beneath the tree you've come to recognize as your station. It leans left slightly and has scratch marks from someone's earlier boredom. You run your fingers along them. Initials, maybe names, maybe prayers. The fire is low now. Only embers remain. Someone fans it gently. Smoke curls upward in thin spirals, almost invisible in the dark. The group is quieter now. The kind of silence that doesn't need words. It's not solemn. It's simply the quiet of shared tiredness. Everyone is used to this. Everyone accepts it. You listen to the shifting of bodies on packed earth, the creak of a rifle sling, the low hum of a tired sigh. Sleep returns in patches, You curl up again under your root, this time using your empty sack as a pillow. Your shoulders ache, your knees feel locked, but you find a position that almost resembles comfort. The jungle continues to sing, low and layered. A bird calls once, then again, then silence. Somewhere far away, thunder rolls. Not threatening, just distant, like a story being told by the horizon. You close your eyes. In your half-dream, you imagine a home-cooked meal. Fried galonggong, steaming rice, mangoes so ripe they nearly melt. You picture a sorry store. You picture streets and slippers and the radio playing. But then the images fade, replaced by the weight of the rifle next to you, the cold of your damp shirt, and the reality that morning comes quickly, and it will demand more from you again. The final thoughts you have before surrendering to sleep aren't brave or poetic. They're simple. Will there be food tomorrow? Will the next patrol be mine again? Will the Japanese push closer? And finally, quietly, I miss my mother. And then, silence. No dreams. Just breathing. A morning that starts without a sunrise. You don't wake up, you surface. Sleep ends, not because you've had enough of it, but because the jungle does not let you sleep for long. A sudden cough from a comrade, a branch snapping, a low whistle, and just like that, your body re-enters its cycle of tired wakefulness. There is no rooster, no clock, only the gradual graying of the sky above, pale light straining through thick layers of palm and bamboo. The sun is awake, but you'll never see it. The jungle canopy eats it up before it can ever reach your face. You shift on the ground, your back is sore, your limbs feel heavy. There is a damp chill in your spine from the way your shirt clung to the soil during the night. You stretch in silence. Talking isn't done until absolutely necessary. Everyone knows the morning is the hardest part. The quiet misery of Bodhi's waking in a place they never truly rested. Your first task is not breakfast, it's checking gear. You inspect your rifle like a ritual, brushing off any soil, checking the bolt, tapping the barrel to ensure it's still clear. Moisture is a constant threat. Rust creeps in fast. One misfire could mean disaster, not just for you, but for the entire unit. You wipe the weapon with a rag you keep tucked in your waistband. You inspect your bag, half empty, half ready, and tighten your boots with the same knot you've tied 100 times. Eventually, someone brings food. It's not what you'd expect. A small handful of cold, sticky rice pressed into a banana leaf, a single salted fish the size of a finger, and a piece of boiled cassava. It smells like smoke. You eat without complaint. Taste is irrelevant now. Food is function. A quiet ceremony of survival. You chew slowly, not because you're savoring it, but because there isn't enough to justify rushing. Every grain matters. You drink water from a reused glass bottle. It's been boiled, but the taste of ash still clings to it. Still, it's water, and it slides down your throat like comfort. For a moment, you sit back against the trunk of your usual tree and let yourself breathe, deeply, softly. The forest is fully alive. Now, monkeys call in the distance, birds hop noisily through branches, and insects chatter like gossiping vendors. The officer, a wiry man with a hoarse voice and a face worn thin by stress, finally speaks. He explains the day's goals. A supply route must be scouted. A message must be relayed to a distant unit through the old trail by the riverbank. 2 new recruits must be trained on basic maneuvers. You're assigned to escort the message runner, a teenage girl who arrived last week, brave but shaky. You don't question the assignment. No one does. Orders come, and you carry them like stones in your pocket. The trail to the river is known to you. Still, nothing feels familiar anymore. The jungle rearranges itself each day. Fallen logs appear where none were. Pathways shift from dry to wet overnight. A nest of ants now clogs the route you once preferred. So you take the longer route, cutting through low brush, ducking beneath thorns, your body already stung and scratched before the morning even settles in. The girl walks behind you, quiet but determined. Her name is Lena. She doesn't complain. You glance back once in a while, making sure she keeps pace. She does. Her rifle is too big for her, the strap awkwardly adjusted. She looks like she hasn't slept either, but there's a fire in her eyes. Not anger, not courage exactly, but the kind of spark people carry when they've lost everything and still keep moving. You pass a fallen tree where someone long ago carved initials into the bark. The moss covers most of it now, but the letters peek through like whispers from the past. LR plus MB 1942. A love story, perhaps. Or a promise. You pause a moment, then keep going. Crossing the river is always tense. The water isn't deep, but it moves fast, and the stones are slick. You wade carefully, gripping a vine for balance. Lena follows, almost slipping once, but regains her footing. On the other side, you both stop to catch your breath. She smiles faintly, and you nod. Not because everything's okay, but because small victories deserve small affirmations. You reach the rendezvous point near a massive boulder. An old Japanese supply post once stood here before it was burned. Now only blackened timber remains, reclaimed by vines. You sit beneath its shade. Lena waits while you scout ahead for safety. You tap a sequence of knocks on the bamboo. Another code. Seconds later, a whistle replies. Safe. You waver forward. The message is passed along in whispers from one runner to the next. It's a strange system. No radios, no certainty. But somehow it works. The Guerrilla network is a web strung across mountains and valleys, villages and jungle paths, held together by memory and trust, just long enough to feel your breathing slow. The air is heavy with the scent of crushed leaves and distant smoke. Someone is cooking far away. You can smell it. Garlic, maybe onion. Your stomach growls, despite having eaten not long ago. You remember your mother cooking adobo on quiet afternoons, the way she'd hum an old condiment while stirring the pot. You hold the memory like a photograph in your mind, just long enough to feel its warmth, then you put it away. The walk back is slower. Lena is tired. You don't speak. She knows the path now. You let her walk ahead this time. A bird calls overhead. A squirrel races along a branch. The world continues, indifferent to your mission. The forest doesn't care who fights who. It just exists. Growing, dying, renewing. Back at camp, you return to the rhythm. Sharpen tools. Wrap banana leaves for later. Repack supplies. You wash your hands with rainwater caught in a tin basin. It feels cold and strangely comforting. You wipe your face, and for a brief moment, you almost feel clean again. Then the bell rings. Not an actual bell, but a shell hung from a branch. It means attention. Everyone gathers. A briefing. New intel. Possible Japanese movement near the old trail. You might be redeployed tomorrow. Maybe even tonight. You nod slowly. You don't feel fear. Exactly. Just a weight. A quiet, familiar weight that never quite leaves you. Like a blanket that's always a little too heavy. Like a dream you never finish. You return to your tree. You sit. You breathe. And you wait. The afternoon that never ends. There's a strange rhythm to time in the jungle. Not hours and minutes, but sunlight and noise. By the time the sun has reached its invisible zenith, the heat becomes something else entirely. It's no longer just hot. It's oppressive. It presses down on your shoulders, making even breathing feel like labor. You sit in the shade, or what little there is, but it doesn't offer much relief. The humidity clings to your skin, your shirt damp even when you're sitting still. You try not to move too much in the afternoon. Movement leads to sweat. Sweat leads to dehydration, and you've only got so much clean water. So instead, you sharpen your bolo with slow, methodical scrapes. The rasping sound oddly comforting in the quiet. Others nearby are doing the same. Oiling rifle parts, patching sandals with leftover strips of rubber, folding and refolding maps drawn by hand. These are rituals, actions not just of utility, but of sanity. You need something to do. You need something to keep your hands busy. Otherwise, the waiting will consume you. There's a boy in your squad who has taken to carving small birds out of twigs. He's not very good, but that doesn't matter. He passes the time by shaping wings, sanding beaks with a fragment of shell. Sometimes he hands the birds to others, like small charms, tokens of quiet friendship. He gives you one. It doesn't resemble any bird in particular, but you accept it and tuck it into your pack like a sacred thing. It weighs nothing, but somehow makes the day feel lighter. A sudden noise breaks the lull. A distant crack, like bamboo splitting. Every head turns. No one speaks. You freeze. It could be a branch, could be a deer, could be a scout, could be worse. Seconds stretch. Then, a bird call. Not from the trees, but from a comrade posted at the ridge. It's the signal for clear. Everyone relaxes, but only slightly. You've learned not to fully let your guard down. Not here, not ever later, you're asked to help move supplies. You and another fighter, a woman from Batangas, whose Tagalog is soft and steady, carry a crate together, each gripping one end. Inside are wrapped packets of rice, salt, and some bandages. It isn't heavy, but every step uphill tests your legs. You don't talk, you just walk. The sound of your footsteps in the undergrowth is a lullaby of repetition. Crunch, lift, step, breathe. Over and over. You reach the cache site, a hollow beneath the roots of an ancient tree. You lower the box with care. Inside the root system are other items. Jars of preserved tujo, a stack of folded letters, a rusted pistol wrapped in cloth. These are your insurance. If the main camp is raided, if you're forced to flee, these hidden stores may be the only thing keeping you alive for the next few days. You smooth the soil back over it with your hands and scatter leaves until it blends seamlessly with the jungle floor. No one will find it unless they already know. The walk back is slower, your legs ache. Your eyes scan the trees automatically, not even conscious anymore of the way you look for movement, color, shadow. The jungle teaches your body how to see differently. You no longer need full shapes, just suggestions. The curve of a helmet, the glint of a bayonet, the twitch of a bird disturbed. You've become part of the forest in a way city folk can never understand. You listen with your skin now. You reach camp again by late afternoon. There's a small fire burning, barely visible through the thick foliage. A kettle sits atop it, boiling something that smells vaguely herbal. You pour yourself a tin cup. It's bitter bark and roots, but warm. And in the jungle, warmth is more precious than flavor. You sit and sip, letting the steam rise and curl into the thick air around you. You close your eyes for just a moment. Not to sleep, just to pause, just to slow everything down. Someone begins humming an old folk tune. The melody is soft, off-key, but strangely grounding. You can't place the exact lyrics, something about a river, about lost love. But the song drifts into your ears like fog, and you let it settle there. The past feels close when people sing. You remember the voices of your family, your childhood neighbors, your old teacher's lullaby. The past comes back not in full images, but in smells, in sounds, in shadows. The squad leader calls for a quick assembly. You join the others in a loose circle beneath a low awning of banana leaves. He speaks with his hands behind his back, posture straight despite the exhaustion in his eyes. We move again before nightfall, he says. Too much heat here. Enemy patrols are sweeping along the ridge. We'll head south. No one groans, no one protests. You just nod, quietly storing the new coordinates in your mind. You take 10 minutes to pack. That's all. It doesn't take much. Your life fits into a canvas sack, a rifle, a blanket, 2 extra shirts, the carved bird. You sling it over your shoulder and prepare to move. The line forms. Single file, with enough space between each person to avoid detection. You set out, your boots silent against the mossy trail. Behind you, the camp slowly disappears into the green. The march is slow, not from fatigue, but from caution. Each footstep is measured, every branch bent aside, not broken. The jungle is a witness, and you don't want it telling your secrets to anyone who comes after. The deeper you go, the thicker it gets. Trees grow close, air grows thin, vines reach down like hands from above. But you move forward, always forward. Eventually, you reach a small clearing by a stream. This will be the next resting point. No fires here, not yet. You unroll your blanket, set your pack down gently, and sit cross-legged on the earth. It's damp, but familiar now. The wetness is part of you. It's in your boots, your bones, your breath. You settle in for another night, and as darkness begins to whisper through the leaves, you do not think about escape. You do not dream of comfort. You only count the number of breaths you've survived. One more. Then another. Then another still. Night in the jungle doesn't fall like a curtain. It seeps slowly, quietly, like a heavy mist, slipping through the trees. You barely notice when it starts, but suddenly you can't see your own hands clearly. The trail you walked just hours ago has vanished into shadows. The world flattens. There are no sharp edges, only silhouettes and sounds. Distant chirps, the occasional rustle, your breath. Everyone moves less at night. Even the birds seem to whisper instead of call. You huddle near a root, sitting on a scrap of tarp, rifle across your lap. Senses stretched to the limit. Every flick of a leaf makes your muscles tighten. Every creak of the bamboo sets your teeth slightly on edge. You try not to imagine footsteps, but your ears invent them anyway. Tonight, there's no fire, no light of any kind. Light means attention, and attention gets people killed. So you eat cold rice from a banana leaf, the grain slightly sour with age. Beside you, someone gnaws quietly on dried fish. No one talks, there's no point. Words carry, and besides, there's nothing to say. You've all accepted the silence. It's the only thing you can trust. Your body aches, not from injury, but from tension, from stillness. Your knees are stiff, your shoulders are tight. You haven't stretched in days, haven't slept properly in longer. When you try to shift your weight, the quiet snap of a twig beneath you sounds like thunder. You freeze, hold your breath. Can't wait nothing, just a frog somewhere in the trees, croaking slowly like a ticking clock. Sleep doesn't come. You don't lie down. You lean back. Close your eyes, but your ears stay open. Your mind won't let go. You drift into something more like blinking unconsciousness. 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, interrupted by the imagined noise of boots or a plane overhead. This is how you rest, now in fragments. In a fog, you remember the first time you slept in the jungle. You were terrified. Everything moved. Everything hissed or howled or cracked. You thought every insect buzz was a bullet. But over time, you stopped panicking. Not because you became brave, but because fear became normal. Constant, like hunger, like sweat. You don't notice it anymore, unless it spikes. Someone taps your shoulder gently. It's time to rotate the watch. You nod in the dark and trade places with the sentry. They don't say a word, just slump into your spot. You take their place near the edge of the perimeter, eyes squinting into the abyss of green and black. You just wait an hour, maybe 2. You wait until someone else taps your shoulder again. There's a strange comfort in the repetition, in the cycle. You sit, you breathe, you scan, you think of old lullabies. Your grandmother used to sing rhythmic songs about mango trees and sleeping carabaos and fishermen drifting on moonlit seas. You hum them silently, just in your head. The memory is soft, a blanket over your brittle mind. A twig cracks again, this one closer. You tense. It might be nothing, might be a lizard, might be a scout. You bring the rifle slowly into your arms, finger near the trigger, but not on it. You wait. A long silence. Then another noise. A rustle. Further off. You exhale. False alarm. But your heartbeat takes longer to calm down, and you know you won't be blinking out for a while now. Later in the night, a light drizzle begins. The soft patter of rain on leaves becomes a white noise that dulls everything else. You lift the collar of your shirt over your neck to stay dry, but it's useless. Within minutes, the humidity soaks everything. Your blanket, your boots, your socks. You feel the moisture cling to your spine, slip into your sleeves, settle in your hair like dew. Rain is both gift and curse. It masks your movements, but it also ruins maps, dampens bullets, floods your hiding holes. You sit through it, motionless, letting it baptize your exhaustion. In the dark, with the rain as your only soundtrack, your thoughts float. You wonder what day it is, what time, whether your old house still stands, whether your mother still keeps the window open for breeze. You wonder if she's looking at the same sky. Eventually, dawn hints at its return. Not in color, but in sound. The cicadas begin to shift tone. Birds mutter gradually. The cold becomes slightly less sharp. There's a smell of damp earth, fresh and thick, like the jungle is exhaling. You're still sitting, still soaked, but alive. Someone whispers, "Shifts, don't you nod? Trade places again. Sit down, close your eyes, sleep might come, or it might not. Either way, you breathe in, breathe out, and remind yourself you've made it another night. The mission is never just the mission by now. The days and nights have blurred into a single long, wet ache. You don't know how long it's been. Time stopped mattering somewhere between the third relocation and the fifth half-slept watch shift, when the squad leader tells you that a mission has come in, a real one, not just resupply or patrol. It feels almost alien. You've been surviving, not planning. Now, suddenly, there's a goal again. And it feels heavier than expected. He gathers the group beneath a thicket of overgrown bamboo. His voice is low, steady. There's a convoy scheduled to pass through a clearing 5 kilometers west. Japanese supply trucks. Our job is simple. Hit, scatter, disappear. The word simple tastes strange in your mouth. Nothing has been simple since the first bullet passed your ear. But you nod, like everyone else. Because nodding is easier than feeling. They give you instructions, times, positions, fallback paths. You carve the details into your mind like etchings on bark. You know better than to write anything down. If you're caught, words on paper can kill you. Instead, you repeat the information silently, again and again, until it's muscle memory. Your lips move in the pattern of the route, while your hands scrub soot onto your face for camouflage. When you finally begin the march toward the ambush site, the jungle looks different. It's the same trail, the same trees, but the air has changed. Heavier, thicker, as if it knows, as if the vines and leaves are leaning in closer to listen. Every step feels rehearsed and yet uncertain. You hold your rifle tighter, not for defense, but for focus. It's something solid, something you can trust. You arrive at the clearing near dusk. The sun bleeds through the trees like a distant fire, all orange and gold and fleeting warmth. You take your position behind a tree stump, half buried in moss. To your left is the girl with the carved birds. She's quieter than usual, jaw clenched. To your right, the Batangwega with steady eyes checks her last bullet like it's a prayer bead. You wait and wait. Waiting is the real battlefield. Hours stretch. Your muscles cramp from stillness. Ants crawl across your forearms. You don't dare brush them away. You imagine the convoy arriving. The trucks, the boots, the noise. You imagine the timing being wrong. You imagine someone sneezing. You imagine getting shot before you even stand. The mind is not your ally. It fills the silence with failure. The first sign is the rumble, low, vibrating through the soil. Then the crack of tires on dry bark. You don't breathe. The trucks roll in painted khaki, stained with dust, crawling through the clearing like beetles. There are 3, maybe more behind. You count men, 6 in the front cab, 2 in the back, 1 with a mounted gun. You wait for the signal. A sharp bird call, the kind that doesn't exist in this part of Luzon. You hear it, and then everything changes. The explosion is blinding. One of the front tires disappears in a blast of dirt and shrapnel. Screams follow. Bullets light up the clearing like sparks in a dry field. You raise your rifle, fire once, twice. You don't look to see if they hit. You just move, just like the drills. Move, fire, vanish. You're no longer a person. Your rhythm, a pattern, a ghost in the undergrowth. You don't know how long it lasts. 2 minutes, 10. Your ears ring, your hands shake. When the noise stops, your lungs are burning. You've run without knowing where you're alone. Or maybe not. Shadows flicker past your vision. Is that a comrade? An enemy? A memory? You crouch by a fallen log, heart pounding like a drum line. You count your ammo. Just instinct. Now for bullet. A full clip in your pocket. You don't reload. Not yet. You listen. Eventually, voices Tagalog. You emerge slowly. Everyone looks different. Eyes wider, faces blank. You see the girl with the bird, she's missing a boot. Limping, blood at her ankle. She doesn't say a word, just nods at you, as if asking, "You still here?" You nod back. You don't say anything either, you don't have the words. The squad regroups deeper in the forest. No fire, no talking, just a long task of counting. Supplies, people, Losses. One man didn't come back. The leader says they'll check the area again at first light, but in his voice, you hear it. The quiet morning. He knows. You all know. The jungle doesn't give people back. That night, you lie awake again. But this time, it's not the forest that keeps you up. It's the silence inside you. Something in you feels ... less. Like a small piece was left back there in the clearing, next to the bullet casings and tire shards. You close your eyes, but the convoy plays over and over again in the dark theater of your mind. You see the face of a soldier, one of theirs, barely older than you. The way he looked, surprised. The way he fell. You tell yourself it was necessary. You repeat the line your leader gave you. Supplies delayed, our lives saved. You whisper it, again and again. A lullaby of justification, but the jungle doesn't offer comfort. Only stillness. You eventually drift, not into sleep, but into a space between. A floating place, where thoughts move like mist. Where the ground doesn't feel real, where your name feels like something that belonged to a different life. You've made it to morning, but you're not sure you've really arrived. Surviving feels nothing like winning. When the sun finally rises the next morning, it doesn't burst through the trees. It filters, softly, slowly, like golden steam through leaves and branches. You don't notice it at first. You're still sitting with your back against a trunk, eyes half closed, muscles still clenched from the night before. Your hands smell of rust. Your clothes damp with the dew of fear and jungle fog. No one speaks yet. There's a hush, not out of strategy this time, but from exhaustion. Everyone looks smaller in the daylight, hunched, shrinking into themselves. You hear someone coughing quietly into their sleeve. The kind of cough that has lived in the lungs too long. A few meters away, someone else is writing in a tiny notebook with a stub of charcoal. You don't ask what they're writing. You know it's not poetry. Your squad leader moves among you slowly, checking heads. There's still one missing. No one says his name, saying it would make it too real, too final. You hear the decision in the silence. We won't search again. Not today. The jungle made its choice. Someone passes you a piece of cassava wrapped in old cloth. You chew on it without tasting. Your stomach accepts it like a machine. No pleasure, no disgust, just fuel. You sip water from your shared tin, now lukewarm and mossy. Still, it's precious. Every drop is a moment closer to surviving another day. The group begins to move again. No marching, no formation. Just quiet footfalls in soft soil. Your boots squish slightly from last night's rain. Leaves slap against your face gently as you pass. Somewhere in the trees above, a monkey shrieks. Not out of alarm, just irritation. Even the animals seem tired of this place. By midday, the air has grown hot and thick again. Sweat comes quickly, without effort. You feel it slide down your spine in slow, itchy trails. You don't bother wiping it away. You've learned to live with it, the way you live with everything now. Quietly. You reach a river and take turns wading through, watching the water turn brown with the soil from your boots. A leech clings to your shin. You pluck it off like peeling a sticker. When you reach your new campsite, a hidden nook beneath tall kogon grass and near a banana grove, the relief is faint. You still have to dig latrines, set perimeter markers, watch for aerial patrols. There is no true rest, just different tasks, different aches. You take off your boots for the first time in 2 days. Your feet look pale and wrinkled, the skin soft and strange. You stare at them for a while, like they belong to someone else. Later, when the sun begins to slip behind the hills again, the leader gathers everyone around. Grounding, he tells a story. It's not about war. It's about his grandmother, about how she used to dry tobacco leaves on the roof of their Nepa hut, and how the scent filled their whole street. He describes it so slowly, so lovingly, that for a brief moment, you almost smell it, that dry, sweet, dusty tanks of home. You realize, then, how long it's been since anyone told a story that wasn't about death. Someone laughs, softly, the first real laugh in days. And it feels like air after drowning. For just a breath, you remember why you're out here. What you're holding on to, what you're sacrificing, not for glory, not even for revenge, just So maybe someone else doesn't have to live like this. That night, when you finally sit down again under the tarp, you feel your bones protest. You lie back, arms behind your head, staring at the shifting silhouettes above. Fireflies drift lazily between branches, and owl hoots once, deep and low. The jungle, too, has rhythms. And tonight, for once, they feel familiar. You drift, not into fear, not into numbness, but into something resembling rest. A soft space, a blank quiet. Your body still aches, your mind still replays the chaos, but for now, you let go. Just a little, just enough to breathe slower, deeper. You made it through a week, and you understand now. Surviving is not winning. Surviving is enduring, waiting, holding the thread of yourself tightly enough that it doesn't snap. Not yet. And as you close your eyes to the lullaby of crickets and soft dripping leaves, you realize one more thing. The jungle does not care, but it also does not rush. And neither will you. Why you wouldn't survive a week as a Filipino, guerrilla and more, the man with a mountain. How Macario Sakay became the outlaw hero before the hair grew long. This is your calm immersion into the life and legend of Macario Sakay, the Tagalog revolutionary turned bandit turned martyr. We'll begin with the part no one talks about. Not the wanted posters, not the American execution, not even the Republic. We're starting with who he was before the long hair, the leather coat, the forest campaigns. Because behind every rebel is a boy who learned how to disappear first in alleys, not jungles. The story doesn't begin with guns, nor swords, nor even bold speeches. It begins in the quiet side streets of Tondo, long before it was covered in layers of diesel soot and traffic horns. In the 1870s, Tondo was still growing. A tight weave of wooden houses on stilts, bamboo fences, and the ever-present hum of life lived close together. Children ran barefoot over broken cobblestone. Vendors shouted beneath woven umbrellas. The scent of drying fish mixed with wood smoke, and the sharp taps of vinegar being poured over rice. Macario was born into this noisy, breathing tapestry. His family was not poor in the romantic sense. They were simply ordinary. His father was a working man, sometimes a laborer, sometimes a helper in the tailoring shops along Kale. His mother took in washing when she could. There were no family heirlooms, no bookshelves, no carved chairs from the old Spanish just hands that worked, mouths that shared what little they had, and a roof that held during most storms. He learned to read early, thanks to an elderly neighbor who still held on to an old cotilla from her teaching days. He didn't attend school in any formal way, not until later, but he listened, and he watched. Tondo raised sharp boys who knew how to look at people and read intention the way others read newspapers. Macario watched the way people flinched at the sight of a Guardia Civil. He noticed how his father's back straightened a little too quickly when a Spaniard passed by. He filed it away. Even as a child, he understood fear lived under every smile. When he was old enough to work, Macario apprenticed. As a tailor, he learned to hem, to stitch, to fold fabric cleanly. It wasn't glorious, it wasn't dangerous, but it was steady. And more than that, it allowed him to observe. Men came into shops with news on their breath. They talked while being measured. They gossiped while trying on coats. He heard names whispered under cloth. Bonifacio, Rizal, Katipunan. That word, Katipunan, stuck to him like lint on wool. It was everywhere and nowhere. A secret that everyone seemed to know. He'd walk past groups of men in hushed conversation and hear it again. He didn't ask. Not yet. But the pull had begun. You have to understand, the Manila of Sakay's youth was not one of open rebellion. It was one of careful calculation. The Spanish rule was tightening, but it had not yet cracked. There was always a fiesta around the corner, always another saint's procession, always a church bell to drown out the quiet hunger for change. But beneath all of that, beneath the floral shirts and sabong games, something was growing. A collective breath being held. Macario grew into his late teens with this feeling stitched into his bones. He was sharp, quick with words, and quicker with smiles. But there was something behind his eyes. Something that didn't teal off, even when his mouth did. Friends later described him as serious, even when playing. That seriousness became conviction soon enough. When Bonifacius Katipunan emerged fully in 1896, Macario didn't hesitate. He joined not out of rage, but purpose. He wasn't the loudest recruit, nor the strongest, but he showed up. He moved he spread he learned to trust silence more than noise. And when the Spanish began to crack down, he didn't run. He adapted. The streets of Tondo became his forest. He slipped between patrols like wind through curtains. But rebellion was no longer just whispers and pamphlets. It was blades drawn, bullets fired, blood spilled. Macario saw it all. He saw friends dragged away at dusk and never returned. He saw boadies in the Estero bloated and nameless. He saw his neighborhood darken, one lantern at a time. And still, he stayed. The revolution would twist and turn. Oganaldo would rise and fall and rise again. The Americans would arrive like new landlords with the same cane in hand. And through it all, Macario watched, waited, and planned. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This is just the beginning. This is the boy in the alley, the apprentice with listening ears, the future rebel in a borrowed coat. Before the mountains, before the Republic, before the gallows, and the promise that when the time came again, when the land needed him, he would not stay behind the needle and thread. He would stand. The tailor who refused to surrender the Spanish were gone. The sun had barely set on their empire, yet already another flag flew from Manila's towers. One colonizer out, another stepped in stars and stripes instead of crowns and gold. Too many Filipinos. It was a changing costume, not character. The beat of boots on soil remained the same, and for Macario Sakei that beat had become intolerable. In the earliest years of American occupation, Sakei tried the diplomatic path. For a time, he laid down his arms and walked the uncertain terrain of reform. He believed, briefly, in the idea of building change from within. A government formed by Filipinos, led by Filipinos, shaped by the quiet power of people's will. The revolutionary fires still smoldered in his chest, but they flickered under the hope of peace. He even joined the Philippine Republican movement, a short-lived attempt to create a Filipino-led political entity under the nose of the Americans. For a moment, Sakei wore the coat of compromise. He traded rifles for speeches, ambushes for printed leaflets, but the Americans were not interested in power. They wanted obedience, and they made that brutally clear. One by one, Sakei's peers were arrested. The movement was branded bandits. They were called an old Spanish insult, revived and sharpened. In reality, the Americans feared what the movement truly represented, the spark of real independence. And so they crushed it, not with debate, but with prisons. Sakei was arrested in 1902 for sedition and rebellion. He was sent to Bilibid prison, a place whose walls were lined with the ghosts of revolutionaries past. It was there, within that hollow echoing cell, that the old tailor remembered who he was. The boy the courier for the witness to Spanish cruelty. And now, a prisoner under a different master, chained for wanting the same dream. He did not stay behind bars long. Released under surveillance, he saw the charade for what it was. The Americans were buying time, hoping the revolution would die of old age. But revolutions don't age, they adapt. Sakei left the city behind. No more politics. No more salons filled with cautious idealists, sipping watered-down coffee and debating freedom like it was a parlor game. He returned to what had always worked. The mountain. They called it The Americans used the term with disdain. But to Sakei and others, it was liberation through necessity. If the cities were compromised, the forests would shelter the truth. The hills would hold the republic the plains had surrendered. Up in Mount San Cristobal, overlooking Laguna, Sakei regrouped. He gathered farmers, laborers, ex-soldiers, disillusioned men with nothing left to lose. Together, they declared the formation of the Tagalog Republic. Not a fantasy, not a play, a real republic, rooted in law, ideology, and loyalty. It was not recognized by the Americans. That was the point. The jungle became his capital. His republic had no marble halls, only clearings under moonlight, where pledges were sworn and strategies whispered. Men carried rifles, yes, but also symbols. They wore sashes, bore seals, sang hymns. It was a government of belief, not convenience. a rebellion made of patience and silence. Macario began to dress differently, no longer the plain tailor's son. He grew his hair long, not for fashion, but defiance. He wore a black coat of leather, thick and gleaming like armor. It became his symbol. The Americans would describe him as a theatrical outlaw, but they misunderstood. Every inch of that look was calculated, a uniformed for the unseen. He knew that to lead men in shadows, you had to look like a figure larger than life. But beneath the coat, he was still a man. He still wept when friends fell. He still whispered prayers when the gunfire grew too close. He still kept letters folded tightly in his breast pocket, written by hands that would never lift rifles. He still remembered the streets of Tando, the tailor's shop, the weight of a needle in his fingers. The Americans branded him a criminal. They placed bounties on his head. They printed his face on wanted posters. Not because he killed without mercy, but because he refused to bend. They feared what he represented. A Filipino who had not given up. A government that refused to die. In the mountains, Sake moved with precision. He changed locations often, never sleeping in the same place twice. His men respected him deeply, not because he ruled with cruelty, but because he listened. He made decisions slowly, carefully, even in war. He was not reckless. He knew the cost of every order, and still, the dream held. The Republic of the Tagalog people, a name whispered in hidden clearings, sung in secret songs, passed down from one campfire to another like an ember that refused to extinguish. Sake believed in that republic more than he believed in safety, more than sleep, more than surrender. Even as the net closed around him, he would not abandon the idea. To him, the mountain was not just a hiding place. It was a promise. Peace in Manila, chains in the shadows. It didn't come as thunder. It didn't come as smoke or gunfire. It came as an invitation. In 1906, word arrived that a certain Dr. Dominador Gomez, a Filipino intellectual, labor organizer, and reformist, wished to meet with Sake. The message was simple but seductive. There was a way forward. The revolution could move from the mountain back into the halls of diplomacy. The Americans were open, Gomez insisted, to Filipino self-rule, perhaps a path to autonomy, even a commonwealth. Sake had fought long enough. Perhaps it was time to speak. He hesitated, not out of fear, not even out of distrust, but because peace, no matter how fragile, had always been the goal. He did not climb mountains to stay hidden. He did not raise the Tagalog Republic to live in defiance forever. The dream was to end it, not in surrender, but in fulfillment. A country for its people. Sake's lieutenants were divided. Some were skeptical. Others saw it as a long-awaited chance to lay down their arms. After years of evasion, hunger, damp boots, and burials without names, the promise of peace whispered too sweetly. Eventually, he agreed. A delegation would go down to Manila. They would speak with officials, check the sincerity, see if there was a real door opening. Sake, always cautious, still believed in dignity and the possibility of diplomacy. He brought his men with him, but not his army, not his defenses. It was a discussion, not a siege. The Americans welcomed him into the capital like an awkward guest, polite on the surface, wary underneath. He was given quarters at Cavite, in a house that was neither prison nor sanctuary. They offered food, shook his hand, listened, and then they arrested him. There was no negotiation, no proper dialogue, no accord. The offer of peace had been a trap, not orchestrated solely by the Americans, but certainly used by them. Whether Gomez knowingly participated or was outmaneuvered is a murky tale history never fully answers. What is clear is this: Sake was betrayed. They called him to a reception at the Lona Theater in Cavite, a celebration, supposedly, in his honor. He arrived in a clean barong. He shook hands. He smiled politely. There was music, and by night's end, there were chains. Hidden soldiers seized him. He was taken without resistance. The Americans now had what they needed: the outlaw in their custody, not as a warrior on a battlefield, but as a man lured into peace. They spun it as justice. They called him a criminal, a danger, a threat to stability. He was charged not with treason, not with political rebellion, But with bandolerismo, it was not just a legal tactic, it was narrative warfare. By branding him a thief, a lawless rogue, the Americans erased the Republic. No flag, just a coat, a gun, and a man they could hang. Soke stood trial in August 1907 alongside his comrade Luciano de Vega. The proceedings were quick. The verdict was never in doubt. The sentence, death by hanging. But death did not come immediately. For months, he sat in prison. Some say he spent those weeks in quiet reflection. Others claim he continued to write, to assert the legitimacy of the Tagalog Republic. He was offered clemency if he renounced the Republic. He refused. To the end, he insisted it was never banditry, it was sovereignty. And when they led him to the gallows, he didn't beg. Witnesses say he asked only that his remains be treated with dignity, that no dishonor fall on the Republic he died for, that future generations know he was not a thief in the night, but a president of a hidden republic, buried beneath vines and tree roots, where flags were hand-sewn and loyalty paid in silence. He stood on the platform, arms bound. He looked ahead, not at the rope, but past it. The noose tightened, the floor dropped, the dream rose, buried by the textbooks, kept alive by the trees when Sake's body swung from the gallows in 1907. Manila barely stirred. There were no riots, no thunderous outcry, just a few tearful eyes in back alleys. Whispers in barrios, a silent, suffocating pause. The Americans had done more than hang a man. They neutralized a symbol. With one execution, they tried to erase a republic born under banana trees and baptized by gunpowder and dreams. And they almost succeeded. For decades, Macario Sake was not taught in schools as a hero or even a revolutionary. He was simply labeled a bandit, a footnote in a footnote. The history books, shaped by colonial hands, had little room for a man like him. They spoke of Rizal, Bonifacio, and they even spared room for foreign generals and visiting dignitaries. But Soke, the man who led a mountain republic years after others had surrendered, was smudged out. It wasn't just omission, it was rebranding. In newspapers, he was caricatured as a rogue, a long-haired outlaw who styled himself as king. They mocked his leather coat, painted his republic as a farce, his army a band of thieves, his constitution nonsense scribbled in jungle notebooks. No mention that the Tagalog Republic had a cabinet, laws, citizen support, or that Sake fought long after others had knelt. And so he faded, not in spirit, but in visibility. Still, not everyone forgot. In hidden corners of the archipelago, especially among the poor and rural, his story was retold softly. In hushed tones near evening fires, elders whispered of a man who never gave in, a man who lived in the trees and died with dignity, a man who said no long after everyone else had said yes sir. They remembered the leather coat, the long hair, the soft eyes behind the firm words. For them, he wasn't just a rebel, he was the last one to believe, when believing had a cost. Their version of Soke didn't match the headlines or textbooks. Their Sake was not a bandit. He was the president of a buried dream. In the years that followed, the Philippines would gain independence on paper, and with each generation, history would be new voices would ask, who did we forget? By the 1970s, a different narrative began to re-emerge. Historians and playwrights, disillusioned by neat colonial stories, started digging. They looked beyond archives stamped by foreign seals. They found letters, photos, transcripts. They listened to oral histories passed down like contraband, and slowly, Soke began to return. He was no longer the leather-clad outlaw. He was the founder of the Tagalog Republic, a continuation of the First Philippine Republic, a leader who never signed a surrender, a man who didn't fade, but was buried alive by narratives that feared him. In 1993, over 8 decades after his death, Macario Sake was finally recognized by the Philippine government as a hero, not a criminal, not a nuisance, but a revolutionary patriot. Still, his name carries tension. Even today, he's not always in the school books. His image is grainy, often overlooked. His republic is still sometimes questioned, diminished, or treated as a footnote. But for many, especially those from working class barrios, From mountain towns, from places that never fully trusted the official version, Suke remains the people as president. His legacy doesn't live in statues or glossy museums. It lives in places where dreams still grow between tree roots, where resistance still blooms in silence, where boys still dream of wearing coats not to show off, but to stand firm. Suke is in the breath before surrender, the pause before obedience, the quiet refusal to give in. And every time someone asks what really happened after Aguinaldo surrendered, his story stirs again, not loudly, not with explosions, but like a footstep on dry leaves, like the rustle of a coat in the forest, like a republic still waiting under the trees. The aftershocks. Mountains without their lion. When Suke's body was laid to rest, something peculiar stirred. Not in Manila, but in the mountains. He once wrote, there, in the cold mist of Rizal Laguna and Quezon, his absence rang louder than his presence ever did. Villages that once housed his troops began to grow quiet, but not complacent. His supporters, those who had given food, shelter, and silence when danger hovered overhead, some hoped peace would finally settle. Others feared what always comes when the wild man is gone, control disguised as peace. The Americans had won the war on paper. They had the buildings, the guns, and now the narrative. But what they didn't have was the loyalty of the hills. Up in the ridges where banana leaves drooped heavy with dew and dogs barked at the wind, stories were still told. They didn't call it the revolution anymore. That was too loud, too risky. Instead, they called it Young Panahon NG Boondog, the time of the mountains. No names, no dates, just a memory passed in code. And in that code, Sake's image remained intact. Every young man who stepped off into the woods to escape conscription or land grabbing, every farmer who whispered at night about tax collectors, every bird that held meetings without permits, all of them carried a little ember from his code. They didn't say it outright. They didn't need to. You could feel it in the way old men paused when they passed a particular trailhead, or the way mothers told children not to trust smiles in uniforms. Some said that rebels still wandered, decades after, claiming to fight for the Tagalog Republic. Whether they truly believed or were simply invoking a name that still carried power, no one really knew. But the idea, the ghost of the Republic, floated like smoke in the trees, and the hills were never silent. In the 1930s, as America prepared to grant independence, a new generation of activists, organizers, and visionaries emerged. Some looked to Rizal for inspiration. Others, more quietly, looked to his defiance, his refusal to compromise, his deep suspicion of deals made in air-conditioned rooms. These resonated with those who still had dirt beneath their fingernails. Then came World War II. The Japanese arrived, and once again the Philippines burned. Once again, people fled to the mountains. Once again, resistance was born beneath the trees. And it was here in the very same trails Suke once walked that new freedom fighters emerged. Guerrillas, hucks, and makeshift militias, all of them borrowing not just tactics but spirit from those who came before. Some of them even spoke of Saka's ghost, still watching, still judging. They carved stories into tree trunks. They etched initials onto rocks. Not for glory. For memory. After the war, the Philippines gained independence. Flags were raised. Presidents were sworn in. History was tidied up. Heroes were picked, boxed, and placed neatly into textbooks. But the mountains never forgot. Local theater troupes started writing plays about Suke. Not grand musicals, but comedia-style dramas told with tambourines and kerosene lamps. Teachers in remote barangays whispered his name in between official curriculum. He became a kind of code again. Not illegal, just inconvenient. And in quiet moments, when someone stood atop a ridge in Tanay or Infanta or Antipalo, the air still carried that scent of resistance. That memory of a man in a leather coat who never bowed. The coat itself became a symbol, not of fashion, of defiance. You could be poor, you could be tired, you could be surrounded, but if you still stood firm, you wore an invisible coat of Suke. Medals, no textbooks, just footsteps on dried leaves, echoing a republic that was never truly defeated. The aftershocks. Mountains without their lion. When Sake's body was laid to rest, something peculiar stirred. Not in Manila, but in the mountains he once roamed. There, in the cold mist of Rizal, Laguna, and Quezon, his absence rang louder than his presence ever did. Villages that once housed his troops began to grow quiet, but not complacent. His supporters, those who had given food, shelter, and silence when danger hovered overhead, some hoped peace would finally settle. Others feared what always comes when the wild man is gone. Control disguised as peace. The Americans had won the war on paper. They had the buildings, the guns, and now the narrative. But what they didn't have was the loyalty of the hills. Up in the ridges where banana leaves drooped heavy with dew and dogs barked at the wind, stories were still told. They didn't call it the revolution anymore. That was too loud, too risky. Instead, they called it Young Panahon Enji Boondog, the time of the mountains. No names, no dates, just a memory passed in code. And in that code, Sake's image remained intact. Every young man who stepped off into the woods to escape conscription or land grabbing. Every farmer who whispered at night about tax collectors. Every barangay that held meetings without permits. All of them carried a little ember from his code. They didn't say it outright. They didn't need to. You could feel it in the way old men paused when they passed a particular trailhead, or the way mothers told children not to trust smiles in uniforms. Some said that rebels still wandered, decades after, claiming to fight for the Tagalog Republic. Whether they truly believed or were simply invoking a name that still carried power, no one really knew. But the idea, the ghost of the Republic, floated like smoke in the trees, and the hills were never silent. In the 1930s, as America prepared to grant independence, a new generation of activists, organizers, and visionaries emerged. Some looked to Rizal for inspiration. Others, more quietly, looked to his defiance, his refusal to compromise, his deep suspicion of deals made in air-conditioned rooms. These resonated with those who still had dirt beneath their fingernails. Then came World War II. The Japanese arrived, and once again the Philippines burned. Once again, people fled to the mountains. Once again, resistance was born beneath the trees. And it was here in the very same trails Suke once walked that new freedom fighters emerged. Guerrillas, hucks, and makeshift militias, all of them borrowing not just tactics but spirit from those who came before. Some of them even spoke of Saka's ghost, still watching, still judging. They carved stories into tree trunks. They etched initials onto rocks. Not for glory. For memory. After the war, the Philippines gained independence. Flags were raised, presidents were sworn in, history was tidied up, heroes were picked, boxed, and placed neatly into textbooks. But the mountains never forgot. Local theater troupes started writing plays about Soke. Not grand musicals, but comedia-style dramas told with tambourines and kerosene lamps. Teachers in remote barangays whispered his name in between official curriculum. He became a kind of code again. Not illegal, just inconvenient. And in quiet moments, when someone stood atop a ridge in Tinea or Infanta or Antipalo, the air still carried that scent of resistance. That memory of a man in a leather coat who never bowed. The coat itself became a symbol, not of fashion, of defiance. You could be poor, you could be tired, you could be surrounded, but if you still stood firm, you wore an invisible coat of Sukarno medals. No textbooks, just footsteps on dried leaves, echoing a republic that was never truly defeated. Return of the leather coat, reinventing a forgotten flame. By the late 20th century, the Philippines had changed. Roads had names, neighborhoods had walls. The revolution was now history, or so it seemed. Yet somehow, every few decades Macario Soke would return. Not physically, of course, but symbolically. A face without a statue, a name without a holiday, but a presence that kept slipping past the guards of silence. He would reappear just when the country needed a reminder of what unpolished defiance looked like. In university campuses, especially during times of unrest. From martial law to EDSA, Sake's name would surface. not as a historical trivia answer, but as a quiet battle cry. Students would speak of a revolution that didn't end with Aguinaldo's capture, that maybe, just maybe, the true lost president of the First Filipino Republic was not the one who signed a surrender, but the one who kept a small republic breathing among the roots and rifle barrels of Sierra Madre. In 1993, a small but meaningful shift occurred. The Philippine government officially recognized Soke as a hero. For the first time, state acknowledgement aligned with the mountain whispers. But even then, the recognition came quietly. Not as a national event, but a low murmur in the margins. Some textbooks updated his profile. A few plaques were raised, but there was no parade, no curriculum overhaul, no broad public reckoning. Still, for those who knew where to look, the symbol was restored, not just as a figure from the past, but as a question for the present. What does it mean to resist? What does it look like when someone refuses every form of surrender? Not just military, but ideological. Artists and writers began to rediscover him. Soke was painted into murals, sketched into zines, scripted into indie films, not as a clean-cut hero, but as something more raw, a man of contradictions, charisma, and fierce loyalty. Some painted him as the first anti-colonial hipster. Long hair, leather jacket, forest chic. Others saw him as a protectivist, a man who stood when others knelt, who believed when belief was costly. And as each new protest movement surged, from student walkouts to peasant marches, his image would flicker again. A poster here, a spoken word piece there, a name dropped during a teaching on agrarian reform. It wasn't mainstream, but it was persistent, even online, in forums, blogs, and eventually social media. His story began to find traction among young people digging past the topsoil of textbook history. They began asking different questions. Why didn't we learn more about him in school? Why did the Americans call him a bandit? Why was his government ignored? And with those questions came something even deeper, a recognition that not all heroes wear medals. Some just refuse to kneel. Sake's leather coat became a metaphor, a symbol of unvarnished resistance. A reminder that patriotism doesn't always look like polished speeches and wipe-arongs. Sometimes it looks like sweat, mud, and guerrilla law in the trees. Some even began to draw parallels between Soke and modern activists, vilified or criminalized for standing against injustice. They said the coat still fits. The long hair might have been replaced by slogans, hashtags, or pamphlets, but the spirit remained. It's ironic, perhaps, that a man once erased by history became a myth that history couldn't kill. He lives on not because a government declared it so, but because people, young, restless, unsatisfied, keep resurrecting him when the world seems too quiet about injustice. And maybe that's the final revolution, not the republic he led, but the refusal to forget him. The myth of the mountain lion. When history becomes folklore, there's a point in every legend where fact ends, and something else takes over. It's not always about what really happened, but what people needed to believe it. And with Macario Soke, that point came softly, like mist curling through the forests he once called home. In the barangays along the Sierra Madre, people still talk about it, not in classroom tones, but in Kwentong Matanda. The whispered stories of the elderly passed down like family recipes. They don't call him general or president. They just say, "Cease," like an uncle you almost met, like a cousin you heard about but never saw. Some say he could disappear into shadows, move like wind through bamboo, that he once escaped an American ambush by hiding under the roots of a belit tree, and the tree grew to shield him. Others say his coat, the famous leather one, wasn't just for style, but blessed by an albalario making him invisible when danger was near. It didn't matter whether these stories were true. What mattered was why people needed them. For a country so often told to move on, to forgive, to forget, Soke represented someone who never did. A spirit who stayed stubborn when history demanded surrender. And for that, he became myth. Children were told tales of a man in a long coat riding horseback through the fog, checking on towns during stormy nights. He was now a guardian, a mountain lion, watching from the ridges, keeping memory alive, even when textbooks tried to hush him. Old folks claimed to hear his voice in the wind when fires were lit in the forest. Some believe that when someone stood up against a corrupt mayor or a land grabber, they were wearing Sakei's shoes. And maybe they were. Because the power of a myth is not that it's terrestrial, but that it makes courage feel possible. In the 1970s, when martial law swallowed the country in silence, some student activists scrawled Sakei's name on walls. Macario lives. One said, not a slogan, a signal, a reminder that somewhere in the history denied, there was still a light burning. Local poets began writing verses about him, not in formal rhyme, but in the jagged, emotional cadence of protest. Some envisioned him not as a soldier, but as a prophet, warning the country not to sell its soul for stability. Others imagined what would have happened if he had survived. Would he have joined government? Would he have rejected all power forever? He became a canvas for what people feared, hoped for, and resisted. Even artists took hold of the myth. Paintings of Sakei began to blend the literal and the imagined. One mural showed him with an eagle on his shoulder, his coat flowing like wings. Another depicted him in a trance, eyes closed, surrounded by fireflies, as if the forest itself had chosen him as protector. And in more ways than one, it had his face, rugged, mustachioed, focused, began to appear on stickers, t-shirts, and eventually memes. At first, ironic, then reverent, he became the rebel spirit in a generation of students tired of hollow nationalism, the patron saint of those who believed in action over ceremony. Even today, in storytelling nights in upland towns, people still tell stories of Sakei's return. That one day, when the country needs him most, a man in a long coat will come down from the mountains again, not as a ghost, but as a reminder that the Republic isn't dead, just waiting, watching. Like him, what still remains? Leather, leaves, and the last breath of the Katagalugan time, they say, is the great eraser. Names fade, statues wither, flags change, but there are some things even time hesitates to touch. For Macario Sakei, it was never about winning, not in the traditional sense. His republic fell, his men scattered, his name was but here's the thing, the story didn't end with the gallows. In some small, stubborn way, it kept breathing, not through state ceremonies or school books, but in quiet places, on dusty shelves of independent libraries, in whispered conversations between tired workers during break time, in the mouths of elders who remembered the sound of defiance, even if they'd never met the man himself. What remains of Sakei isn't carved in marble, it's not wrapped in metals, it's scattered, like leaf litter along the trails he once walked. You'll find it in the rustle of bamboo in the Sierra Madre, where small community forests still stand, defiant in the face of logging and greed. You'll hear it in the cadence of street protests, in chants that echo with rhythm and rage. You'll feel it in the small shivers of recognition when a young person stumbles on his name for the first time and thinks, why didn't I know this before? Because that's the legacy Sakei left behind. Not fame, but friction. Not monuments, but movement. In a world that often celebrates power, he chose conviction. In a history that favored the polished, he remained rugged. And in a system that tried to erase him, he left his shadow behind anyway. That shadow, gentle as it may seem now, still it touches every time a young writer pens a revolutionary character, every time a community leader stands firm without a mic or permission slip. It lingers when someone chooses not to compromise. Not for comfort, not for peace, not for applause. The Katagaluga in the Republic he fought for no longer exists on a map, but perhaps it lives in a different form. Not as territory, but as memory, as an ideal, as a soft murmur that says you can stand, even when it hurt. And if you walk through the hills where he once ruled, if you sit quietly under the trees, listening to the wind pass through the leaves, you might hear it too. Not a roar, not a battle cry, just a breath, steady, unyielding, alive, like him. The golden goddess and the river that whispered gold. Imagine a river that doesn't rush. It meanders, it sighs. It pulls at the edges of its own path like a mother smoothing a child's hair. This is the Wawa River in Oguson, a body of water more patient than time itself. It has never needed to carve canyons or thunder through valleys. Instead, it simply weights gathering secrets, soaking history into its muddy bed. One morning, in July of 1917, that river gave something back. A woman named Baile Campos, harvesting abaca fiber on the riverbank, noticed something strange. In the low waters, not a stone, not a branch, but a chimera soft gleam of gold caught between the weeds and soil. As she reached down, her hands brushed something cool and smooth, almost impossibly crafted. She pulled, wiped the mud, and stared. It was a statue, 21 carats of solid gold, a woman or perhaps a goddess sitting cross-legged in quiet majesty, adorned with intricate jewelry, hair tied in a high bun, face serene as if untouched by 1,000 years. Her size was surprising, nearly a foot tall, heavy, regal. Her presence, even caked in centuries of silence, demanded reverence. She became known as the Golden Terror, but no one knew how she had come to be there. No one knew who made her, or for who. Not even the elders could say. In the town square, people gathered to look, to speculate, to remember old stories. Some said she was a goddess who had fallen from the sky. Others whispered she was a queen whose kingdom sank in the flood. Still, others claimed she was not meant to be found at all, that she had been hidden for protection, buried before invaders came, and the river was only now undoing that secrecy. Even today, over 100 years later, no clear answer exists. All we know is this: she was not supposed to exist here, because the terror didn't fit with the story the world had long told about the Philippines, a story shaped by colonizers, centered on conquest, colored by Christianity. She wasn't Spanish or American, or even clearly Filipino by textbook terms. She was older, Southeast Asian, Hindu, Buddhist, graceful go. She stood as proof that before the colonizers came, this archipelago already held deep, sophisticated connections with the wider world. And so, her mystery began. Not just the question of who made her, but why no one remembered her. The map that forgot her name in the early 1900s, the Philippines was being reimagined on paper. Maps were redrawn. Districts were renamed. A national identity was being assembled like a puzzle, its pieces shaped by colonial scissors. Yet, in all these maps, both geographic and historical, the Golden Terror was nowhere. There was no space in the colonial imagination for a gold goddess. 2. The American officials stationed nearby. The statue was a curiosity. Yes, but one inconveniently complex. After all, they were busy civilizing what they thought was a backward nation. But here was a relic that said otherwise. It suggested the islands had once traded with Indian kingdoms, that artisans here once sculpted with religious devotion, that communities existed long before Magellan's ships ever docked. The statue was quietly taken. It passed hands, traveled seas, and now sits far away in the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago. Its display label, gold figure from Mundane, circa 9th-10th century, a goddess, reduced to a cabinet number. Her backstory dissolved in footnotes, her creators unnamed, her language lost, and yet, even in silence, she endures. Researchers have tried to trace her lineage. Some suggest she was a local adaptation of Terra, the Buddhist goddess of compassion and liberation, worshipped across India and Southeast Asia. Others point to links with a maritime empire that once ruled the seas of Sumatra, Java, and beyond. There are theories that Indian traders brought her, that she was cast by local goldsmiths who once knew ancient scripts now vanished. But every theory opens more questions than answers, because the Golden Terror is not just a statue. She is a contradiction, a disruption in the neat timeline of colonization, a golden fingerprint left by a forgotten civilization whose name we no longer know how to pronounce. She forces us to ask, how much of our own past have we lost to silence? How many rivers still hold the stories we've stopped telling? She waits not to be solved, but to be remembered. The kingdom beneath the trees. To understand the Golden Terror, you have to step beyond borders. Not the modern ones drawn in ink and lore, but the older, softer boundaries that breathed with the forest, where kingdoms rose not with stone walls, but with trade routes, language, and rivers. Long before the Philippines was the Philippines, there were other names: Suvarnadvipa, the island of gold; Mai, a trading port whispered in Chinese scrolls; Butuan, a kingdom that floated on balangas and gold leaf. This is where the story retreats. Into the heart of Mindanao, where the trees once listened and the rivers remembered. Butuan was a place that didn't need marble halls to be mighty. Its power flowed through different channels: boats, beads, brass gongs, and above all, gold. Not mined in massive operations, but sifted delicately from riverbeds, molded by hand, shaped into talismans and crowns. The artisans here didn't just make jewelry, they made meaning. And perhaps it was here, along the riverbanks and under the banyan shade, that a devotee shaped the terrace, not as an object, but as a symbol of refuge. She wasn't merely beautiful. She was spiritual, a protector, a beacon in a world ruled by monsoon seasons and shifting alliances. Butuan thrived because it knew how to listen. It traded with China, Java, Sumatra, even Arabia. It wasn't isolated, it was interwoven with the ancient Southeast Asian world. Boats carried not just spices and gold, but stories, rituals, ideas, and somewhere in that golden age between a fisherman's prayer and a merchant's departure, the Golden Terror was born. She was not meant for conquest, but for communion. She may have sat inside a small shrine, her gold surface flickering by lamplight. She may have watched over a family, or perhaps she was carried on a voyage, tucked in the folds of cloth beside rice and salt. We'll never know for sure. But what we do know is this: her presence was no accident. She belonged to a world that wasn't backward or primitive, but confident, connected, rich with inner life. So why did that world vanish? Why do the people who carved her name into gold vanish from the pages? Not from war, perhaps, but from something quiet, from forgetting, from the soft erasure of not being written down. Because those who do not write are often unwritten. And so, Butuan faded not in fire, but in hush. The trees grew over its docks. The rivers, once highways, became boundaries. And the terror, she slipped back beneath the silt. Waning when the past didn't fit the story. It is strange, isn't it? How something can shimmer so brightly and still be ignored. When the Golden Terror surfaced in 1917, it didn't trigger an archaeological rush. No excavation teams descended. No festivals were held in her honor. Instead, she was quietly whisked away, first to the hands of a local official, then to Manila, and eventually to a museum across the sea. Why? Because she didn't make sense in the story being told. At the time, the Philippines was a newly acquired colony of the United States. American administrators were busy drafting textbooks, building schools, and crafting a national narrative, one that emphasized progress, modernity, and the civilizing mission of the West. And in that carefully arranged version of Filipino identity, there was barely room for something older than the Spaniards, more spiritual than Catholic saints, and undeniably Asian. The Golden Terror was a complication. To acknowledge her was to admit that the Philippines had a sophisticated, deeply spiritual past, one that wasn't defined by Spain, or America, or Christianity, one that reached back to India, Indonesia, and empires the West barely acknowledged. So instead, they minimized her. They said she was interesting, but not significant, that she may have arrived through trade, but wasn't truly native, that she didn't change the story. But the truth, quietly shimmering beneath the surface, told otherwise. Because the terror wasn't just a statue. She was proof. Proof that there were once communities here that worshipped differently, that understood divinity in a feminine form, that revered gold not as wealth, but as a spiritual conductor, that believed in balance, protection, psychology, soft philosophies of the East. But these truths didn't serve colonial goals, and so they were gently set aside. The textbooks focused on Magellan, Rizal, and the American school system. The statues in town squares wore military uniforms, not robes. And the Golden Terror, she became a photograph in a few dusty journals, a museum tag in a foreign land. She waited, again, still shining, still not speaking, because maybe her silence was the final rebellion. She would not argue her place. She would simply remain, a quiet challenge to the version of history that chose to forget her. The goddess with no temple. Imagine praying without a building. No steeple, no altar, no gilded pews. Just you, a tree, a stretch of land, the sky above you wide and blue. That was often the way of ancient Southeast Asian faiths. The sacred didn't need walls. It breathed in open spaces, and in that openness, Tara was adored. In India, she was a bodhisattva of compassion. In Tibet, she multiplied into green and white and blue forms, each one a reflection of help, mercy, and maternal calm. In Java, she was carved into stone temples, fingers poised in gestures of wisdom and safety. She was a protector, especially of sailors and merchants, those who lived in between worlds. But here in the islands, where the jungle overtakes quickly, where rivers flood and recede, where temples made of wood vanish into earth, Tara may have taken a softer form. Not a grand structure, but a personal guardian. The golden Tara may have sat on a wooden platform inside a Nepa house, or on a small altar near a riverbank shrine. She was small enough to be intimate, precious, carried from place to place, perhaps whispered to at night when the crickets sang and the fire dimmed. She wasn't worshipped like a distant god. She was spoken to like a mother, because Tara, across cultures, has always been approachable, not terrifying, not all-powerful, but deeply, gently attentive. You did not beg her for favor, you shared your worries with her. You trusted her with your smallness. That's why the gold Tara wasn't made of stone or bronze. She was cast in something soft and warm despite its weight. Gold, the metal that never rusts. Gold, the conductor of energy. Gold, the color of light before dusk. Not just treasure, but presence. And even now, her half-closed eyes seem to listen, to hold space, to say, without words, you were always more than what they told you. The silence between civilizations. History is loud when written by the victors, but the in-between spaces, the soft parts, the pauses, the forgotten corners, those are silent. And often, it is in the silence that truth hides. Between the Spanish conquest and American occupation, the story of pre-colonial Philippines was reduced to a blank page. The assumption was simple. Before colonizers, there was nothing. No civilization, no refinement, no belief systems worth noting. But the Golden Terror contradicts that. Her very existence is a whisper from a civilization that didn't scream. A culture that expressed itself not in wars and monuments, but in the slow rhythm of trade, craft, ritual, and connection. They left few inscriptions. Their buildings didn't survive the climate, but they left behind something more powerful than documents. Objects of devotion. Terror, found in a floodplain, is one such object, and from her we sense a life of rituals at dawn, of small fires lit to the sound of gongs, of women weaving gold filigree while humming, of boats departing under coconut palms, statues tucked safely in pouches of woven cloth, a life that didn't need armies to matter, and perhaps that is why she was forgotten. The conquerors didn't understand a culture that didn't fight back in their language. They expected cities with walls, thrones, and palaces. But the people who shaped Terra lived in harmony with tides and forests. Their legacies were not towers, but traditions. And so, when that way of life was interrupted, when ships arrived with sails, and Crescist the silence grew, the people adapted, converted, hid what they could, forgot what they had to. Terra sank both literally and metaphorically into the riverbed of history. But she did not rot. She did not dissolve, because silence, when heavy with truth, can be more enduring than words. The river that remembers, they say rivers forget. That water moves too fast to keep a memory. But there are places, especially in tropical lands like ours, where the rivers don't forget. They hold on softly, under silt, beneath fallen leaves and drifting reeds. In Aguson, the Wawa River still flows the way it always has, curling lazily through forest and farmland, lapping gently at muddy banks, quietly carrying stories. If you listen long enough, it hums with an old song. Not loud, not even clear, but steady, soft as a mother rocking a child to sleep. And it was in this river, swollen by rain and time, that the Golden Terror surfaced. Not in a grand discovery, not on an expedition, just by chance. The year was 1917. A young woman named Pilar Campos was gathering rattan near the water's edge. when she noticed something glimmering beneath the mud. It wasn't shaped like a coin or a necklace. It had eyes, a face, presence. Can you imagine that moment? She had no tools, no archaeologists, brush, just her hands. Just the weight of something older than the names of her village. She pulled it free, and in that instant a past surfaced. But this was not a past that anyone was ready to receive. The golden figure passed quickly from one hand to another, as if too hot to hold. From Bailey to the local authorities, from Mindanao to Manila, from the Philippines to Chicago, where it rests, still on display behind glass. Thousands of miles from the river that once cradled it. What the river gave, the world took away. But that is the way of these stories. They do not end in triumph. They end in echoes. The Golden Terror didn't return to a temple. She didn't become a national treasure. She simply became a singular, quiet, gleaming question. What else have we forgotten? And what still lies beneath our feet, waiting to be unearthed? She still shines, quietly. She doesn't move. She doesn't speak. And yet, she lingers in the mind long after you've looked away. Behind the glass of a Midwestern museum, the Golden Terror sits under artificial light spotlit, catalogued, and silent. Visitors walk past. Some pause. Some read the plaque. Golden female figure, 9th, 10th century, Philippines. Fewer still understand what they're really seeing. But you do now. She was never meant to be caged in a case. She was never treasure. She was guidance, a companion for the uncertain, a protector for the She was cast not in gold for vanity but because gold does not decay, even when time does. And that's the miracle. Centuries passed. Empires came and went. Flags changed. Languages shifted. But she remained, not by clinging loudly, but by outlasting quietly. And that is, perhaps, her final message to you, that your story doesn't need to be loud to be real, that your strength doesn't need to be conquest, that your roots may lie deeper than you were ever told. In her closed eyes and gentle smile is a kind of mercy, a reminder that you are not lost in history. You are simply part of a cycle that breathes, rests, and returns, just as the river does, just as the moon does. And maybe, just maybe, you've passed her before, in a dream or a daydream. Maybe you've heard her hum in the background of the world, because stories like hers never really end. They just drift downstream, until someone stops to listen again. The bamboo kingdoms of gold and gossip, where the winds carried wealth, long before the Spanish galleons sliced through the Pacific. Before even the maps were drawn with sharp colonial ink, the islands we now call the Philippines were already breathing in rhythm with the world. Not as a colony, not as a blank slate, but as a connected archipelago, humming quietly with trade, protocol, tradition and, yes, hierarchy. On the surface, it was peaceful. Coconut palms danced lazily in the breeze. Carabaos groaned softly in the paddies. The sun, patient and heavy, swept across rivers that gleamed like stretched-out mirrors. But beneath this calm shimmered the flow of luxury and influence. The barangay wasn't just a village. It was a kingdom in miniature, a floating world of alliances, protocols, rituals, and ranks. And at its heart was not a king in the Western sense, not a dictator, but a node, a central point through which all obligations flowed. He didn't need to. He ruled through Utina Luba, debt of gratitude, a thread of obligation woven, soft as silk, yet binding as rope. And the Datu's house, it was no castle. It was built of bamboo and thatch, elevated on stilts above the ground, catching breezes in ways no stone building could. But don't be fooled. Simplicity is not poverty. Step inside, and you would find refined grace, the floor polished by hands, mats woven with patience, ornaments of shell, ivory, gold. Sometimes the air inside was thick with apog smoke, sometimes with perfume brought in by traders from Champa or There was always food fresh, tender, simmered in vinegar, and sultan always talk. The elite didn't just feast. They conversed, often in riddles, proverbs, and layered metaphors that turned every meal into a soft contest of wit. But perhaps the most powerful room wasn't a room at all. It was the veranda, the open space at the edge of the home, where the Datu and his advisors would watch the tide come in. From here, They saw boats. Boats meant information. Boats meant tribute. Boats meant foreign merchants arriving not as conquerors, but as guests. It was a quiet kind of power, one not rooted in iron, but in relationships. The Datu's daughter might be married to another noble 2 islands over. The local Catalonian priestess might be tied to his court not by blood, but by shared dreams. And the Chinese merchant offering silky in exchange for beeswax and pearls. He might speak no Tagalog, but gold crosses borders without needing translation. We often imagined the elite as distant, cruel, or out of touch. But in this world, they had to be attuned to the wind, to the gossip on the water, to the shifting loyalties of island diplomacy. A missed greeting, a poorly worded message, a delayed offering all could tip the fragile balance. So yes, life was easier for them than for farmers but it came with invisible threads kind that tangle you in soft knots. Honor, grace, prestige, all beautiful, all heavy. And still, the ocean lapped outside. Still, the banana trees rustled. Still, the night fell with a warm sigh. And inside these bamboo kingdoms, the elite lived not in opulence, but not above their people, but suspended among them like lanterns in the dark. Power measured in silence inside the back section of the Datu's house where the water jars glistened and the moonlight crept in between bamboo slats. A servant quietly scooped water into a clay bowl. Not a word was spoken. The gesture was learned, repeated, and understood without sound. In the pre-colonial high houses of Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao, the elite did not command with shouts or barking orders. They moved within a quiet rhythm, and that rhythm dictated everything from how guests were seated to how questions were answered with metaphors rather than truths. The elite were trained from youth, not just in combat or governance, but in grace under observation. A young heir didn't learn by decree, but by watching his father's pauses in conversation, his mother's choice of words when presenting offerings, the tilt of a visitor's head when a riddle was dropped like incense into the air. A Datu's authority came from 1,000 small things. How his hands looked when folded, how his gaze landed when he listened. It was presence, not performance, and that made all the difference. Ceremonies played a big role in reinforcing this unspoken authority. There were no thrones but mats of fine banig, hand-woven, patterned with identity. A Datu would sit cross-legged, and the position of each guest around him told a story of closeness, alliance, suspicion, or favor. Sometimes, the meeting wasn't about decisions at all. Sometimes, it was about letting time settle between people, like silt forming in the bend of a river. And time, to them, was not wasted when it was spent in listening. The elite often consulted the Babalanda spiritual leaders who stood outside hierarchy yet with an influence. These priestesses, or sometimes male shamans, were intermediaries between the seen and unseen. Even the most powerful Datu would pause when the Barbalan muttered after reading smoke or watching the way a lizard crawled across the beam. This was a world where signs mattered, where the stars, the color of rice, husk, smoke, and even the way an offering burned in the fire could influence diplomacy. The elite did not ignore these details. They lived by them. And beyond the ritual, there were the daily acts of hosting. The Datu's household was always ready to receive, not just guests from nearby islands, but foreign traders from across the ocean. They came bearing spices, cloth, glass, beads, and sometimes iron blades. The Datu didn't meet them with taxes, but with carefully measured generosity. To give too much was desperation. To give too little was insult. But to give just enough with grace was diplomacy. And that diplomacy ran deeper than trade. It affected marriages, alliances, and even seasonal raids. A Datu who hosted well might avert conflict with a single meal. A Datu who failed to honor protocol could trigger a feud passed down 3 generations. All of this the looks, the silences, the shared beat or chew formed, the invisible scaffolding of elite rule. It wasn't about wealth alone. It was about belonging to a language of power that whispered, never shouted. So while the farmers toiled in the rice fields, while the fishermen cast their nets before sunrise, the elite were weaving a different kind of net, one made of favors, debts, and respect. And as the sun dipped below the Nepa roofs, casting gold across palm-lined yards. That web shimmered not in spectacle, but in stillness, because in these bamboo kingdoms, stillness was strength, and silence. Silence was a sword. What the currents carried, the waves had long been highways, even before there were names like Philippines. Before the Spanish scribes and their feathered hats, the sea already stitched the islands into a living, breathing fabric. And those who lived atop the hierarchy didn't just rule over soil, they ruled through what moved across water. We often think of power as swords or soldiers, but in these coastal kingdoms, power was porcelain from China, textiles from India, sandalwood from the Spice Islands, and beeswax pearls and gold from their own shores, all drifting in and out like the tides, carried by sailors with sun-browned backs and stories in their eyes. The Datu wasn't just a chief. He was also a merchant lord, a quiet overseer of goods that traveled farther than the clan's reach, and every item bore a meaning. When a trader arrived with jars of fine earware, pale green and flawless, the Datu did not simply nod. He examined, asked, offered a meal first. Negotiation was soft like a song sung backward, full of implication. Perhaps a necklace would be offered instead of coins, or bundles of beeswax tied in banana leaf, or, if the trader were important enough, a favor to be named later. But what mattered more than the goods was the reputation. Not every Datu had the right to trade with the best. Word traveled faster than boats. Who welcomed guests with song, who insulted them with indifference. Reputation was currency, and that currency could not be mine. It had to be tendered. In some courts, like those in Butuan or Tondo, Chinese traders came not with wares, but with tribute lists and official seal symbols that meant that Datu was recognized, not just locally, but internationally. And for those elite families, that recognition mattered deeply. It meant that when their sons were married, their daughters veiled, or their dead honored, the world was watching if only through the lens of tribute. But not all wealth showed itself. You might visit an elite home and see no gold on display. The floors may be bamboo. The food, humble. Yet behind the bamboo walls lay bundled silk, weighed gold beads, and perhaps a blade from Jova rare, curved, and never used, only admired. Why hide it? Because quiet wealth commanded more. To flaunt was to show weakness. To keep it veiled known only to those who mattered was a whisper of dominance. Even more subtle was how the elite used gifts to anchor their legacy. A daughter might sponsor the construction of a communal granary not for fame, but so his name would live in people's debt. A noble woman might send fine mats to her cousin's wedding not for status, but to keep the web of kinship tight and glistening. In this world, gold didn't speak in clinks. It murmured in favors, in returned invitations, in the eyes of those who bowed slightly deeper the next time they passed you by. And so, trade was never just about things, it was about stories. Every item in a Datu's house had passed through hands, through mouths, through oceans, and each one carried a memory. The carved Chinese bowl on the shelf, that came after a stormy voyage. The perfumed oil sealed in a bone stopper, a gift from a Javanese noble 5 years ago, found by a diver who almost drowned, but was revived by a priestess's chant. You see, even objects had spirit here, and the elite knew better than anyone how to let those spirits work in silence, like wind through Nepalese. Because when you ruled through currents, you didn't shout, you flowed. Whispers in the wedding smoke. In the pre-colonial courts of the archipelago, love was not a tempest, it was a tide, rising slowly, deliberately, carrying more than just hearts, but also land, trade routes, and power. While the common folk might marry for fondness or harvest compatibility, for the Datu class, marriage was diplomacy. A son's wedding could mean an end to bloodshed. A daughter's dowry could tie islands together like reeds in a raft. The ceremonies were soft and symbolic, but beneath them ran the pulse of long calculation. Long before the first beat of the Agung gong sounded at a union, families had already met, assessed and traded information: how many pigs could be spared, how much rice would be included, and most importantly, whose name would carry more weight after the union. It wasn't transactional in the cold sense. It was ritualized empathy. Both families entered the arrangement like dancers, knowing the steps, but not always the tempo. The woman's family might demand a bigger kaya gift of substance, showing the groom's sincerity and ability to provide. But it wasn't about greed. It was about trust, proof, and balance. Because in these courts, reputation wasn't just individual, it was shared, inherited, and passed like heirlooms. A wedding between two noble families was more than celebration. It was performance, a soft unveiling of alliances and unspoken declarations. The food served, the guests invited, the jewelry worn, even the placement of matsit or whispered intent. And the bride, often young but wise beyond her years, carried not just herself but her people's dignity. Trained in babai, in song, in negotiation. She wasn't a passive ornament. She was a link between clans, a voice in council, and, at times, the deciding word in family disputes. Sometimes, the unions were truly tender, fueled by shared glances, long conversations under the stars, or mutual admiration across the rice terraces. But even in those cases, the family's shadow loomed large. A datu could not afford to love foolishly. A misaligned marriage could fracture coalitions, ignite jealousies, or even attract foreign intervention. One wrong choice, and rival datus might circle like hawks. Elite homes often echoed with layered silence between, a wife raised to speak, only in ceremony, and a husband trained to weigh each word like gold dust. But within that silence was depth. They could communicate with a single look, a lifted hand, or the absence of a greeting. And when they did speak freely, behind bamboo screens and flickering torches, their words were measured but warm, like poetry folded into dried leaves. Romance, when it bloomed in these circles, was restrained but beautiful. Not fire, but smoke rising from sweet-burning bark. A nobleman might court a woman not with loud declarations, but with metaphor-laced riddles, gifted beetle leaves, or a flute melody played at dusk beneath a window. And if love ever went astray, if jealousy entered or betrayal crept in, it was handled quietly. A servant might be dismissed, a cousin relocated, a feast postponed. Punishment was not always about blades, it was about removal from favor, a retreat from the woven mat of influence, because among the elite, love and politics were never separate. A kiss could mean loyalty, a cold shoulder could shift alliances, a single wedding could end raids or begin new ones, and through it all, the women moved like wind through reeds, often underestimated, always observing. They held lineage in their silence, influence in their gestures, and power in their presence. So when you picture the Datu, do not picture him alone. Picture her beside him, gaze lowered in public, but sharp as obsidian beneath her lashes. Because in the bamboo kingdoms, love wasn't just an emotion, it was a tool, a shield, a sword wrapped in silk. The smile that cuts among the elite of the archipelago. War was rarely declared outright. Swords were polished, yes, warriors trained in spears and Campulin blades. But the most dangerous weapons in a Datu's court were words spoken behind woven fans, and smiles held just a moment too long. Reputation among the nobility was a living, breathing creature. It walked ahead of you into longhouses, lingered after you left feasts, and even whispered your name when you were far across the water. One careless word, one poorly prepared offering to a guest, or one misstep in handling a local dispute, and your name could begin to rot from the inside out. This was why elite life demanded constant attention. Every gaze held weight. Every absence from a gathering could spark talk. Why did the Datu of Panay send only his second wife to the ceremony? Why did the young nobleman of Cebu eat before the elder chieftain's daughter arrived? Why were pearls given to this visitor, but only hand-woven mats to that one? The questions hung in the air like incense, never spoken directly, but always felt, and it wasn't just public error that courted destruction. Even a Datu's dreams could be mocked if a rival felt bold enough. One whispered tale that your fleet returned light, or that your daughter cried during her betrothal, and suddenly you were weaker, even if nothing material had changed. Gossip didn't just travel, it moved in markets, between women at the weaving loom, in the mouths of visiting merchants, and once it reached another Datu's court, it was no longer yours to control. Truth or not, it would shape alliances, shift marriages, an altar whose warriors answered your call when trouble came. And yet, among the elite, you could not respond with open rage. To confront gossip directly was to admit it mattered. So instead, the dato responded with a rival's insult might be returned by not inviting them to the next boat race, or by offering a lesser seat at the next feast, closer to the kitchen smoke than to the center mats. If they noticed, and they always did, they'd reply in kind. This was the art of social warfare. No raised voices, just raised eyebrows. Even the smallest things became battlefield terrain. The quality of your beetle leaves, the freshness of your fish during a trade dinner, the complexity of your ceremonial chant, all of it said something. And it wasn't only between men. Noble women wielded their own kinds of influence. If a woman of rank admired another's hair ornament too effusively, it might be mockery or it might be sincere praise. You could never be sure. If she gifted you a scented cloth, was it a peace offering or a subtle jab, implying your fragrance needed help? Such ambiguity was intentional. In the upper layers of society, nothing was direct. That was for the field, for the warriors, for the men who screamed at raids. But for those who governed court and trade, who shaped the flow of goods and the memory of names, war was won through subtlety. And in the center of it all were the chroniclers and poets, those who composed verses during weddings or sang ballads at banquets. Their words, veiled in metaphor, could seal a noble's fame or ruin them. If they praised you, your legend grew. If they described your feast as modest, but warm, everyone would know it was code for a week. Which is why the Datu didn't just invest in warriors. He invested in singers, midwives, advisors, weavers, and dream interpreters, because all of them were keepers of public perception. To rise in elite society wasn't about conquest. It was about navigating storms you couldn't see, only sense. It was about returning every whisper with a quieter, sharper one. It was about smiling while watching the room because someone, somewhere, always was. And when rivals fell, they often fell with no blade drawn. They just weren't invited next time. And in a world where visibility was power, being forgotten was the most elegant execution of all. To die remembered, or to live forgotten. Death in the pre-colonial elite class was never a quiet thing. Even in its stillness, it echoed across rivers and forests, sending ripples that touched trade partners, sworn allies, and even hidden rivals. A noble's passing was not just a private matter, it was a performance of power, a final gesture, carefully orchestrated so that their name might endure longer than their bones. In these islands, where ancestors were as present as the living, to die, well, was perhaps the most important achievement of all. And yet, dying well was not about a grand battle or old age. It was about how you were remembered, what rituals were performed, what songs were sung, who cried at your burial, and who pretended to. Among the DHU class, death did not end social strategy. It transformed it. The way your body was wrapped, the number of gold adornments laid upon your corpse, the intricacy of the coffin carvings, these weren't mere customs. They were coded messages. Signals to those still alive that your household remained strong, that your lineage would persist, that your absence did not mean your name would fade. Some nobles were buried in tree trunks, elevated high into the forest canopy. Others were laid to rest in caves, deep and echoing, far from wandering eyes. Still, others were placed in wooden boats, symbolic of their final journey into the next world. Wherever they were sent, the message was the same. Remember me not as I was, but as I should be. The ceremonies themselves could stretch for days. Fires burned from dusk till dawn. Elders recited long chants not just of the deceased achievements, but of their ancestors' glory, weaving their legacy into an ongoing tapestry. Children were taught these names and stories, not to memorize, but to inherit. To be forgotten was to die a second death, and so the elite ensured their image lingered through carved talismans, gifted heirlooms, and strategically planted stories. A noblewoman might have her favorite comb passed down with instructions to never sell it. A chieftain might whisper his final wishes to a bard, who would then transform them into a song, sung under moonlight for generations. These weren't mere relics, they were anchors to the world of the living. But as much as they were honored, death also revealed cracks. Wakes became stages for rivalry. Cousins might whisper doubts about inheritance. Spouses left behind might realign loyalties. Hidden debts came to light. Forgotten lovers appeared. And amid the incense and offerings, whispers of division fluttered like moths near the flames. Some daughter households rose higher after death. Others began their slow collapse. For women of the elite, widowhood was complex. In some cases, she wielded more influence, becoming keeper of the clan's wealth, steward of young heirs. In others, she was exiled to her parents' home, her dowry reclaimed, her opinions silenced. Yet the most cunning women, those with influence over alliances and oral traditions, knew how to turn grief into currency. They'd host memorials not just to mourn, but to gather information. Who came? Who didn't? Who sent weak gifts? Who cried too little? Even in mourning, politics marched on. And then came the chroniclers, the ones tasked with remembering the dead. They didn't write eulogies, but rather shape-shifting narratives. A once middling noble might be described as a warrior of unmatched wisdom. A Datu's flawed campaign might be edited into glorious victory. And with every telling, the dead became more myth than man, because history in the bamboo kingdoms was oral. An oral tradition was malleable, sculpted not by truth, but by need. That's how the dead lived on as legends, tailored for the living. It's why, long after their bodies had returned to soil or smoke, you could still hear their names whispered in council chambers, or carved into the base of a traded jar, or sung in a lullaby by a child who never knew them but felt their power just the same. To be elite was not just to live with honor, it was to diamond, to be folded into the fabric of story, and to refuse, even in death, to be forgotten. Of blood, oaths, and unspoken wars. In the archipelagic world of pre-colonial nobility, alliances weren't just political tools, they were sacred bonds, formed through blood, smoke, and solemn ceremony. Dadas didn't merely shake hands or exchange gifts when they sought trust, they sealed fate itself. Among nobles, the Sanjuga blood compacto is one of the most powerful rituals that could be performed. Two leaders, often from different islands or rivaling lineages, would make small cuts in their arms, letting the blood drop into a shared drink. Sometimes it was wine, sometimes it was tuba, or even river water. They drank from the same cup, committing their lineages to loyalty and protection. But what many never said aloud was this: the blood compact was more binding than marriage, more feared than a blade, more permanent than trade. Breaking it was not just betrayal, it was a cosmic offense. Spirits were believed to watch over these pacts, and vengeance wasn't always dealt by the living. So when Dadas performed Sanjugo, it was not just about politics. It was a performance of trust that echoed into generation. Their grandchildren would be expected to honor the same alliance. Their villagers would host each other in times of famine or war, and if one side faltered, the breach could unravel peace for decades. Yet even sacred oaths could be tested. There were moments in history where a Datu pushed to desperation or pride, broke the compact perhaps by aligning with a foreign trader instead of a sworn ally, or by not sending warriors during a promised campaign. When this happened, the offended noble would not immediately strike. That would be too crude. Instead, the Datu might send a gift boat carved of red wood, a subtle sign of war, or they might perform a public ritual of withdrawing spirit kinship, signaling that the bond was dead. Such acts were more terrifying than blades, because they declared war to the ancestors. Among the elite, vengeance was never rushed. It simmered. Songs would be composed that excluded the betrayer's name. Old alliances would shift silently. A merchant might be turned away. A daughter's marriage might be suddenly cancelled. All of these were prelude to ruin. Sometimes, betrayal wasn't punished immediately because the betrayed needed to grow stronger first. They'd host more feasts, build more boats, trade with more foreigners, and only once they were secure, then came the storm. And yet, these betrayals birthed new legends. A noble might be remembered not just for building walls or winning battles, but for refusing to break a blood oath even when it cost them everything. Or, inversely, for cleverly navigating out of a compact that no longer served them without ever being blamed. These figures became icons of cunning or caution, and sometimes Centuries later, descendants would refuse to trade with another village not because of any present conflict, but because our ancestors drank blood with theirs, and they betrayed us. The past lived on, long after the pact itself had turned to dust. When the bamboo cracks, the fall of the gilded courts. For all their elegance, all their rituals, the noble courts of old were never eternal. Bamboo bends, yes, but sometimes bamboo cracks. There were periods of abundance, where gold flowed freely, the riverbanks were fat with rice, and alliances stood strong. But just as often, these courts experienced seasons of unraveling, failed harvests, foreign traders who brought more greed than gain. And at the center of it all, the elite tried to maintain the illusion of permanence. They built larger longhouses, hosted more extravagant rituals, clothed their children in brighter cloths. But these gestures could not stop what was coming. Sometimes, it was a plague the kind that silenced entire generations. Other times a natural disaster rains that drowned fields or winds that tore sailboats to splinters. And more often than not, it was within that the decay began. A D2's heir might lack the wisdom of his father. A powerful noblewoman might die without passing on her knowledge. A trusted priestess might suddenly be accused of sorcery. The tight knots of influence slowly loosened. And when they did, rivals rose not from foreign lands, but from inside the household itself. Servants who had long watched from the shadows, cousins with quiet ambitions, allies who had been waiting for the perfect moment. And yet, when the court collapsed, it did not always collapse loudly. It might begin with a missing gift at a feast, or a marriage that never happened, or a rumor whispered at the riverbank. Then, one day, the D2's boat would sail out, and not return. Or, their once famed house would fall silent, the woven walls sagging, the fire pits cold. But something always remained. Sometimes it was a golden comb, buried deep in the soil, or a porcelain jar with foreign script, traded long ago, or a poem half-remembered, sung by an old woman with no teeth but sharp memory. These fragments were what survived, because, though the courts fell, the gossip did not. People still told stories. They remembered the daughter who threw 3 feasts in a week, the noblewoman who whispered to the wind and made it rain, the courtier who vanished after the betrayal of a blood pact. These stories kept the elite alive not in power, but in memory. And so, even in their ruin, the bamboo kingdoms whispered, not with proclamations, but with echoes, the kind you hear late at night as you drift between waking and sleep, when gold turns to dust, when gossip becomes legend, and when the sound of a cracked bamboo pole in the dark reminds you, power never dies, it just changes shape.